Now that we've started learning about operators, it's important to kind of move into parameters. Now, what are parameters? Parameters are what we call the values that are available and can be changed for each given operator to control its functionality. Every single operator has them. They can be scripted, manually controlled, tied to UIs. They can be random numbers that are generated. There's so much flexibility in what you can do with the different parameters that it gives Touch Designer the power to basically do whatever you want it to do. So the first thing you need to know is where the parameter window is. Now, if you open up Touch Designer by default, you'll have this area in the top right here. And by default, it starts the project with open. But the first thing you should know is how to open and close it, because sometimes it accidentally gets closed and new users don't know how to open it again. But if you use the P key on the keyboard, and like we said earlier, this is still lowercase, even though at the bottom of my screen everything's in capitals. This is a lowercase p that I'm hitting. Caps lock is off. And hitting that P key opens and closes that parameter window. So sometimes you might be working and you aren't working with parameters and you kind of just want to see more of your network and have more real estate. You might choose to close that parameter window, but other times you'll probably be working with it open. Now, if you wanted to take this parameter window and maybe disconnect it from this network editor, because right now it's kind of locked to our network editor, you could also go to an operator. You could right click on it and click the parameters, which will open a floating window version of your parameter window. And you can see here, if I drag this next to the docked one, it's all the same parameters, just if for some reason you wanted to have a floating version so that, maybe you turn off this viewer, you're looking around, you're going into different areas of the network, and you wanted to have those parameters kind of available to you in a little floating window. That's how you would do that. So what I'm going to do is I close that window. I'm going to hit P again to open my parameters. And let's start by changing a few parameters and thinking about how that works. So an easy one that we can do is we'll go to this movie file in. That's probably going to be an operator you're going to use a lot. And you'll see immediately there's lots of different types of parameters. There's not just like 20 different sliders with values. There's, for example, this file one allows us to read a file, and what we can see is the path here. And what you'll find you'll be doing often is that if you have something like this and you can't see the rest of the path, you can always click and drag this little edge of the parameters, and you can basically make it bigger until you see all of your data. But let's say we wanted to change this file. What I could do is come over here and either type the path of a new file, or what I could do is click on this plus button, which would open up kind of a little file selector. And in this case, we'll see that this automatically starts by pointing to the kind of stock material that comes with Touch Designer. And probably one of my favorite go-to tools is count.mov. So I'll load that in, which gives you a 100 frame little counter movie. And then let's say we wanted to do things like turn the playback of the video on and off. Well, we can go over to this play command. I have this little on and off button that I can click. And just as simply as clicking it changes it. I have a speed slider here so I can slow it down. Or I can speed it back up. We have these cue buttons here to cue it back to the beginning. There's different pages of operators or different pages of parameters here. Some of them you probably won't use, but we'll go into more of these parameters later as we start looking at kind of some of the more useful operators that you're going to need to know as a beginner. But it's important to note that there are different kinds of parameters. Playing with them will be kind of a good exploration for you. So you can see here, this play mode is actually a drop down with 3 different options here. Now, with that said, what you'll notice immediately is something like speed. It goes from 0 to 1 by default with its little user interface element here, the little slider. But what if we wanted to go faster? I mean, does Touch Designer really limit us to 0 to 1 speed on a video? Absolutely not. It's just that the default range is between 0 and 1 on the little user interface gadget. So if I wanted to go 2 times speed, what I could do is just, click inside of the little value field here, delete the 1, put something like 2, hit enter, and all of a sudden my movie is running at 2 times speed. I could do the same thing. I can say, okay, well, maybe make it 30 times speed, hit enter. Now it's 30x speed, out of control. So let me set that back to 1. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but it becomes a little annoying if you're trying to kind of fine tune a value to have to, go in here, 1.1, click in again. No, I want 1.2. No, actually I need like 1.15. Like these kind of activities are really normal where because our work is generative, you might not exactly know what parameter you need. So you're going to play with it. You maybe want to change the values, move them up a little bit, see how it looks, move it down a little bit, see how it looks. So for these, we have something called the value ladder. So the value ladder is very useful because it basically eliminates the need for us to type a lot of these kind of values. So to use the value ladder, there's two different ways you can use it. And this goes back to why it's nice to have a good mouse. The easiest way to use it is to hover your mouse over a parameter. So example, like I'm putting it over this 1.15 value here, and you middle click and hold. And when you middle click and hold, you'll have this little gray kind of box appear on top of your parameter. And this defines which increments you want to change that value by. So I'm going to let go of my middle mouse and we're going to look at this value. It's 1.15. And let's say, for example, we wanted to move by increments of 0.01. So maybe we wanted to see what 1.16 looks like, 1.17, et cetera, et cetera. So to do that, I would middle click and hold in on it. I would come down to the increment of 0.01. And then what I can do is when I'm hovering my mouse over 0.01, if I drag off of the left edge or the right edge, while still, very important, holding down the middle mouse button, you'll see that now I can just move my mouse left or right, and it's incrementing that value in increments of 0.01. So let's say I was already at 0.15, so I got that value ladder again. Now it's 1.6. Do I like what that looks like? Keep moving a little bit to the right. Now it's 1.7. Move it a little bit to the right, 1.8. And this whole time, you have to keep that middle mouse button down. Now what's 1.9? And I could think to myself, okay, I like where that value is. I release the middle mouse button. My mouse kind of snaps back into place, and that value gets written to that parameter. Now, we could do this in many different ways. So, for example, if I middle click and hold, we were doing in increments of 0.01, but you can see the smallest increment is 0.001. But you can even move this in bigger increments of 1 or 10. So if I really wanted to move it in kind of faster and slower increments, all of those things are available to me. And you can see there's a little display right here where it shows you as you kind of change that value, if it goes to the left and decreases, it does a little red spiral. If you increase to the right, you get a little green spiral, and it becomes more and more green as you kind of keep progressing through those values. So that's a very, very, very useful thing to learn how to use. And you can use it on basically any kind of value-based one. You probably wouldn't want to use it on a toggle or anything like that. I can't imagine why you would. But like, for example, if we go to this displace top here, and let's say we wanted to change the source midpoint, I could put my mouse over this 0.5 value and just as easily start tweaking it and moving my mouse around to scrub through values very quickly and very easily. Now, if for the off chance you don't have a good mouse with a middle click that you can hold and drag easily, or if you're on a laptop, there was a new way added maybe about a year ago on how you can do this another way, and that's to hover your mouse over the value. You're going to left click and hold, and if you hold for just a little bit longer than you would think, all of a sudden the value ladder pops up, and you can do exactly what we were talking about, but using the left click and hold. So a lot of the kind of more senior touchdown developers, because we've developed that habit of using middle click, that's what we use. But if you wanted to, you could also left click and hold for a few seconds until that value ladder pops up. So one final thing to know about the value ladder is a small trick that a lot of people don't know about. But let's say you have, for example, a parameter like this one, source midpoint, and it has two different parts to it, which are the X and the Y, the horizontal and vertical amount of where the midpoint is, the position. I could, let's say, middle click and hold and change this one to, 0.55, and then I go to the next one and I do that to 0.55. But if you have these kind of parameters with multiple parts and you want to change both values equally, you can actually hover over the name of the parameter and then start your value ladder here, and you'll see that it actually updates both of the parameters equally, not just one of them or the other. Both of them get changed equally. So this can be really helpful if you're working with things like maybe translations or transforms where you're kind of just trying to move stuff around on X and Y together, or if you have maybe some RGB values that you want to change in the grayscale, you don't have to go through and change every single one individually. You could just put that value ladder on the actual name. So the final thing we want to learn about kind of parameters and operators is that there's something called the operator info kind of modal. And what that is right now, let's say we have this movie file in. How do we know what the resolution is, what the frame rate is? Kind of like, how do we get information about this operator? You know, we have access to all these parameters, but within these parameters are things we want to control. There's no kind of like information area of the parameter. So there's two ways we can open up this modal that gives us a lot of information. The first is the method that I use and a lot of people use. And again, it goes back to having a good mouse. If you hover your mouse over the operator and you middle click, you'll get this white kind of little pop-up, and it has a lot of very useful information. It's so useful. I had to put this inside of your crash course because first of all, you get things like the performance of it. So you can see the CPU cook time and the GPU cook time. So that's how much time it takes every frame for it to cook. You can see resolution, aspect ratio, format, the start and end frame, the sample rate, which is the FPS in this case for a movie, how much GPU memory it takes. I mean, there's so much information here. It's extremely useful when you're kind of just getting started and maybe there's troubleshooting that you need to do. You know, why is my output not the right size? You know, maybe you need to go look at your source and see if the resolution is correct. And what you'll be able to do is you can do this on any family of operators and you'll actually get different kinds of data that's contextually based on that operator. So you saw, for example, when I did it on a top, which is a texture operator, I got all this kind of texture information. So I can do it on this displace as well. I get resolution, aspect ratio, this kind of things. If I do it on a chop, I'll actually get different things. I'll get the number of channels, how many samples are inside of that channel, whether it's time slice, the sample rate, those kind of things. You know, if I have a SOP, maybe something like a sphere, I can middle click on it and I can see information like the number of points, primitives, vertices, meshes, you know, the 3D kind of coordinates, the size of it, the bounding box positions, the center position. Each family of operators has a lot of different useful contextual information that you can get from it. So what happens if you want to get this and you don't have a middle click? Maybe you're on a laptop or something working. If you go to the parameters of that operator, you'll see in the top left corner this little I. If you left click on that, you'll essentially get the same pop-up box, except sometimes annoyingly you'll get a little hover menu that comes on top of it that you can't get rid of. But essentially this is the kind of worst case scenario. You don't have a middle click mouse, you're on a laptop or something, and you just need to see some of that information quickly. You can click on the operator, get its parameters, and then click on that I to open up the little operator info modal. So with that said, that should give you a good idea of how parameters work and how to get the information of an operator.